Okay, so today we're going deep on a group that I think a lot of people have heard of, APT3,
Mm,
but maybe don't know all the details, all the ins and outs.
right.
And you know they're known by quite a few names, so sometimes you might hear them referred to as Gothic Panda or Perpy or UPS Team, even Buckeye. You also see Threat Group dash 0110 or TG0110.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to the difficulty in tracking these groups. Different organizations, different research groups will come up with their own names for the same group based on, a specific campaign or the tools that they're using.
Right. And then as we learn more about them, the connections kind of start to get made.
Right.
But really, I think the most important thing to get out of the way right at the start is that APT3 is believed to be a China-based threat group and most likely affiliated with the Ministry of State Security, or MSS.
Right.
And their targets, I mean, they're all over the place.
Oh, yeah.
They're targeting governments, they're targeting private companies, and they're also targeting political organizations, really all over the world.
Globally.
Yeah. So really our mission today, I think, is to kind of trace APT3's origins, look at some of their biggest operations, see how their tactics have evolved over time, and also pinpoint a really interesting shift in their focus that happened a few years back.
Yep.
So really what we want you to walk away with is a solid understanding of how they operate and why they've become such a, persistent and significant threat economically and politically.
It's really a deep dive into kind of the cutting edge of cyber espionage.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we say APT3, I think a good place to start is just kind of like their backstory.
Sure.
Who are these guys? What are we really talking about?
So at its core, APT3's activity is strongly tied to China's Ministry of State Security.
Got it.
And MSS is China's primary intelligence agency,
Mm-hmm.
and it's responsible for both internal security and political intelligence gathering.
Got it.
So it's kind of a broad mandate.
Mhm.
The cybersecurity community generally believes that APT3 has been active since at least 2013. And there's some evidence that suggests they could even predate that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so not newcomers by any stretch.
No, not at all. So, who were they going after initially, and what were they trying to achieve, way back then?
So initially, their focus seemed to be heavily directed towards the United States.
Okay.
And we saw targeted attacks against defense contractors,
Mm-hmm.
technology companies, and various government agencies.
So, pretty standard intellectual property theft, just trying to get their hands on secrets.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I guess gathering strategic intelligence as well.
Precisely, yeah. And their early methods often involved exploiting what are known as zero-day vulnerabilities.
Oh, yeah.
So these are flaws in software that even the developers don't know about.
Right.
And that makes them incredibly powerful tools for attackers to gain access to systems.
Yeah, very valuable.
They also heavily relied on spear phishing emails,
Right.
which are highly targeted emails designed to trick specific individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And just good old-fashioned social engineering, manipulating people
Right.
into divulging sensitive information or granting access.
It seems like they came onto the scene with a pretty advanced skill set already, not your average cyber criminals.
Right, no, absolutely not. And even in their early days, APT3 quickly earned a reputation as a highly skilled and persistent threat actor.
Okay.
So it wasn't just about, getting in and grabbing some data. They often established a long-term presence within compromised networks.
Oh, wow. So, I mean, how are we even able to piece these things together? Where does the cybersecurity community come into all this?
Right, so cybersecurity firms and independent researchers
Okay.
play a vital role in uncovering and documenting these activities.
Uh-huh.
So they'll release these threat reports,
Mm-hmm.
and those reports often detail what we call technical indicators of compromise, or IOCs.
Mm-hmm.
And these are things like specific file names, network addresses, or pieces of code that can help other organizations identify if they've been targeted by the same group.
Right. So kind of a way to look for like fingerprints.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So it's like a fingerprint or a calling card almost.
Mm-hmm.
And these reports also outline APT3's methods of operation.
Okay.
So essentially giving a blueprint of how they conduct their attacks.
So it's not just the immediate theft of data, but there's kind of a bigger picture objective at play here.
Right, so while stealing intellectual property was certainly a primary goal, their objectives extended to gathering broader strategic intelligence.
Okay.
So this included things like national security issues, advancements in military technology, and the economic infrastructure of their targets.
Mm-hmm.
And the level of sophistication in their tools and techniques strongly suggests state-level backing.
Right.
So these aren't the kinds of resources or expertise that are typically available to non-state actors.
Yeah, it takes a lot of organization and funding to put together something this advanced.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's get into some of their key operations. And I think, Operation Clandestine Fox is probably a good one to start with because it gives us a lot of insight into their early activities.
Right.
So this took place roughly between 2014 and 2015.
hmm
And, as we said, they were really focused on the U.S. at this time.
Right. Primarily U.S. defense contractors,
Mm.
military technology firms, and various technology companies.
Right. So what were some of their go-to tactics during this operation?
So the methods were pretty similar to what we talked about before, spear phishing emails containing malicious attachments or links
Hmm.
designed to exploit those zero-day vulnerabilities we mentioned.
Right.
But they were executed very effectively,
Mm.
and the impact was considerable.
Okay.
They managed to exfiltrate data that was highly valuable for bolstering China's own defense and technology sectors.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned meticulous planning earlier, and I'm just trying to picture, how this actually looks in the real world.
Correct.
What does meticulous planning for a cyber attack actually look like?
Right, so these weren't, quick smash and grab kind of intrusions.
Right.
Operation Clandestine Fox involved multi-stage attacks.
Yeah.
So first they would gain initial access. Then they would establish a persistent foothold within the network.
Right.
And then they would move laterally,
Okay.
and often taking their time to explore the network and identify the most valuable information to steal.
So it's not just, finding one vulnerability and then, getting out. It's about really digging deep into a network.
Exactly, and maintaining persistence
Okay.
was a crucial element. And this just means ensuring that they could regain access even if their initial entry was detected and blocked.
So it's like a burglar who's not just picking one lock, but figuring out, multiple ways to get into a building.
Precisely.
So, I mean, this is like the theft of blueprints,
Mm.
research documents, classified information. I mean, really the whole spectrum of sensitive data.
Right, so essentially, yes.
Yeah.
The goal was to acquire sensitive technological and military-related information
Uh-huh.
that could potentially accelerate their own development or provide critical insights into U.S. capabilities.
Right.
And exploiting those software vulnerabilities was often the initial key.
Okay.
But it was the long-term surveillance they established
Uh-huh.
that allowed them to continuously harvest data
Mhm.
without raising immediate alarms.
Right. A very sustained effort.
Yes.
Okay. So moving on, I think, Operation Clandestine Wolf is next on our list. And this seems like it targeted a very different kind of victim.
It did. Yeah, Operation Clandestine Wolf began around 2015.
Okay.
And this is where we see a really interesting shift in their focus.
Mm-hmm.
The targets became much more politically oriented.
Okay.
So we're talking about political organizations, government entities and organizations with strong geopolitical ties,
Gotcha.
and a particular emphasis on those located in or related to Hong Kong.
Interesting. So this is a real change from, primarily economic or military secrets to more political intelligence gathering.
Exactly.
Why the focus on Hong Kong specifically?
So while the initial methods of getting in might have been similar to clandestine fox, spear phishing, exploiting vulnerabilities,
Right.
the ultimate aim shifted towards data manipulation and outright political espionage.
Mm.
And the impact of these attacks reflects that.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests a deliberate move towards a more geopolitically motivated strategy centered on gathering sensitive political data, especially concerning Hong Kong.
Uh-huh.
And this wasn't just about gathering information. It signaled a potential shift in China's cyber strategy towards actively shaping political outcomes in strategically important regions.
Oh, wow. So blurring the lines between traditional espionage and more assertive forms of digital interference.
Right.
Okay, and I guess the objective here was to understand and perhaps even influence the political dynamics within Hong Kong.
Precisely.
Right.
And this kind of data would be invaluable for understanding the political landscape,
Mm-hmm.
anticipating potential challenges to Beijing's policies, and formulating effective responses.
Mm-hmm.
It's a clear demonstration of APT3's adaptability.
Right.
They weren't locked into just one sector.
Yeah, they're clearly capable of shifting gears and going after a new set of targets. So they were going after, both local Hong Kong organizations and international bodies involved in the political climate there. I mean, what kind of information would they have been trying to extract?
Right, so we're talking about intelligence on internal resistance movements,
Mm-hmm.
insights into public opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and an understanding of potential future political developments.
Okay, so really trying to get ahead of any kind of organized opposition to Beijing's policies.
Precisely. Yeah, this kind of information would be critical for Beijing to anticipate any opposition and craft its policies accordingly.
Okay, that makes sense. So moving on from foxes and wolves, I guess the next operation on our list is Operation Double Tap, and that sounds pretty assertive.
It does, yeah. Operation Double Tap, which we observed around 2017, really highlighted APT3's increasing sophistication and evolving priorities.
Okay.
The targets were a blend of what we'd seen before, defense contractors, government entities,
Uh-huh.
but also included international corporations with significant economic ties to China. So indicating a continuation of their economic espionage alongside that newer political focus.
Right. So really kind of a multi-pronged approach.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what made this operation stand out from, like a technical perspective? What was different about Double Tap?
So Double Tap involved a highly advanced multi-stage approach to exploiting vulnerabilities.
Okay.
They weren't just leveraging a single flaw in a system.
Mm-hmm.
They were often chaining together multiple vulnerabilities
Okay.
to gain deeper and more persistent access.
Right.
And this was coupled with very sophisticated data exfiltration techniques and a proficiency in moving laterally within compromised networks.
So they were really becoming masters of stealth and getting around those security measures.
Right, think of it this way. Instead of like a massive data dump that would trigger alarms,
Okay.
they might break down the stolen information into smaller encrypted packets that mimic regular network traffic, making it much harder to spot.
So not just getting a foothold, but really establishing deep control within the network? Gotcha.
And the impact demonstrated their growing capabilities. So they could conduct these multi-layered attacks to gain access to numerous systems and extract information over extended periods without being readily detected.
Right.
And the double tap likely refers to this multi-phase approach where they would infiltrate a network
Okay.
and then return weeks or even months later for further data collection.
Oh, wow. So it's like they're planting a seed and then coming back to harvest it later on.
Exactly.
And that level of stealth and persistence, I mean, that must be incredibly challenging to defend against.
It is. They would often deploy custom-made backdoors to maintain control and evade detection,
Okay.
even if parts of their initial intrusion were discovered and remediated.
Right. So they're always thinking one step ahead.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. So we've looked at these key operations, and I think it's pretty clear that there's been a real evolution in both their targets and their methods. And, you mentioned the shift in focus around June 2015, and it seems like a real turning point in their history.
Right. It was a significant shift.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit more about that? What happened? Why this sudden focus on Hong Kong?
So, as we've discussed, their initial heavy emphasis was on U.S.-based entities, defense, technology, government sectors.
Right.
But around mid-2015, we saw this very noticeable shift towards political organizations in Hong Kong becoming their primary target.
Yeah, you mentioned the political climate in Hong Kong. Can you elaborate a little bit on why this might have become such a central focus for them around this time?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this shift very likely correlated with the increasing political tensions surrounding Hong Kong's relationship with mainland China,
Okay.
as well as its interactions with Western countries, and the 2014 umbrella movement, with its significant protests and calls for greater autonomy,
Right.
likely heightened Beijing's interest in closely monitoring and understanding the political dynamics within Hong Kong.
So this period of, significant civil unrest and demands for more democratic freedoms really put Hong Kong on the map in terms of cyber espionage.
It did. And Hong Kong's unique position as a major international hub, a global center for finance and trade and the flow of information, made it an especially valuable target for espionage.
Right. So it's not just about what's happening in Hong Kong. It's about the connections that Hong Kong has to the rest of the world.
Right. It's a place where international interests converge and where a vast amount of political and economic information is constantly being exchanged.
So by focusing on these political organizations, they were essentially trying to get direct insights into the thinking and strategies of those who might be advocating for greater autonomy or challenging Beijing's influence.
Precisely.
Okay.
They wanted to monitor their activities, understand their strategic planning, and potentially even attempt to influence or control the information narrative.
So it's about shaping the narrative as much as it is about gathering intelligence.
Exactly.
Gotcha. And this focus on Hong Kong, I mean, it aligns with a broader strategic objective beyond just that specific region, right?
Right. This shift in focus towards Hong Kong really aligns with what we understand to be China's broader cyber strategy,
Okay.
which includes actively monitoring both internal and external political opposition, and gathering intelligence on political movements, international policies, and public sentiment regarding China's interests, not just in Hong Kong, but globally,
Right.
is a key objective in their cyber operations.
So really kind of thinking about the big picture here,
Absolutely.
it really paints a picture of a very strategically driven and highly adaptable threat actor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's get down to the nuts and bolts of how they actually carry out these attacks.
Yeah.
What are some of their common tactics, techniques, and procedures, their TTPs?
So understanding their TTPs is crucial for cybersecurity professionals
Yeah.
because it provides insights into how they operate
Right.
and helps in developing effective defenses.
Okay.
And as we've discussed, a key characteristic of APT3 is their ability to tailor their attacks to the specific target.
Okay, so they're not just using a one-size-fits-all approach. They're
Yeah.
really customizing their attacks.
Right.
So let's start at the beginning. How do they typically gain that initial foothold in a system?
So initial access frequently relies on two main methods.
Okay.
The first is spear phishing,
Mm-hmm.
and these are highly personalized emails that are designed to look legitimate
Right.
and entice the recipient into clicking on a malicious attachment or following a harmful link.
Right.
And the content is often very specific to the individual's job role or their known interests
Oh, wow.
to increase the chances of success.
So it's not just some random email that's like, you won the lottery, it's
Mm.
something that's going to be really tailored to that specific person.
Exactly.
And then what's the other common method?
So the second common method is exploiting zero-day vulnerabilities.
Okay.
And as we've touched on, these are incredibly valuable because there are no immediate defenses available.
Right.
So this allows APT3 to potentially breach systems without triggering those standard security measures.
Right. So it's like finding a secret passageway into a building
Sure, right.
that no one knows about.
Right.
Okay, so once they've managed to get inside a network, how do they maintain their access and move around to find what they're looking for?
So for persistence maintaining their grip on the compromised system,
Mm-hmm.
they commonly deploy custom-made backdoors.
Okay.
And this is essentially malicious software that they install.
Right.
Which allows them to regain access to the system even if their initial entry point is discovered and patched.
So it's like leaving a hidden key under the mat or something.
Yeah, right.
Gotcha. And then how do they actually move around once they're inside? What's their approach to that?
So for lateral movement that is moving from one compromised computer to other systems within the same network,
Mm-hmm.
they demonstrate significant skill.
Okay.
So imagine a thief getting into a building through an unlocked door, initial access.
Right.
Lateral movement is like that thief, using internal hallways and finding other offices or departments within the same building to access more valuable information.
So they're really casing the joint.
Precisely.
Gotcha.
So they navigate these internal networks, they identify other vulnerable systems,
Uh-huh.
and they escalate their privileges, often using a variety of techniques to gain administrative control over key servers and workstations.
So it's about getting deeper and deeper into the organization's systems.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then, of course, there's the crucial step of actually getting the stolen data out of the network without being detected. How do they manage that?
So they're highly skilled at data exfiltration,
Okay.
and they often extract large amounts of data in a discrete manner,
Mm-hmm.
frequently using encryption to hide the contents of the stolen information,
Right.
and employing obfuscation techniques to make their network traffic appear like normal, legitimate communication.
So they're trying to blend in.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
They might also stage the stolen data on an internal server within the compromised network
Okay.
before slowly siphoning it out to external servers they control.
Yeah. Oh, so it's like a slow drip rather than, one big, flood of data coming out.
Right, exactly. And that helps to avoid triggering alarms that might be raised by a sudden large transfer of data.
Makes sense. So, it sounds like they're really thinking about all the angles here.
Yeah.
And then finally, how do they try to cover their tracks and avoid being identified?
So evading detection is an ongoing game of cat and mouse.
Mm-hmm.
They employ various anti-forensic tactics,
Okay.
which are designed to remove or obscure evidence of their presence and their activities.
Gotcha.
So this can include deleting system logs,
Right.
modifying file timestamps to make malicious files appear legitimate,
Okay.
disguising their malware to blend in with normal network traffic,
Mm-hmm.
As we've mentioned, they also often use encrypted communication channels
Right.
to control their back doors and to exfiltrate data,
Right.
making it much harder for investigators to intercept and analyze their activities.
Yeah, I mean, it really sounds like a very sophisticated and well-coordinated operation. I mean, it's pretty clear that they put a lot of thought and effort into this.
They have, yeah.
So let's consider the broader impact of all this activity. What are the real-world consequences of APT3's operations for both organizations and nations?
So the impact is felt across multiple levels.
Hmm.
Um, Economically, the losses resulting from attacks on defense contractors and technology companies are substantial.
Right.
So the theft of intellectual property, research and development data, and classified documents
Mhm.
not only causes significant financial harm
Right.
to the targeted organizations,
Hmm.
but also creates an unfair competitive advantage, primarily benefiting China in these critical technology and defense sectors.
Right, and that has implications for, not just individual companies, but entire countries.
Absolutely, and this has far-reaching implications for national security and international trade.
Yeah, it's a much bigger issue than just, a single company losing some data. Um, and then moving beyond the direct economic costs, what are the geopolitical consequences of something like this?
Geopolitically, the shift towards targeting Hong Kong political organizations
Mm,
clearly demonstrates how cyber espionage can be leveraged to influence international diplomacy and political outcomes.
okay.
So the intelligence they gather from these groups can provide valuable insights into international attitudes
Right.
and could potentially be used to shape future geopolitical strategies.
So it's not just about, stealing secrets for economic gain, but also about gaining strategic leverage on the global stage.
Precisely.
Wow. Okay. And the long-term strategic risks, I mean, those are pretty significant, right?
They are, yeah. The value of the information they steal extends beyond immediate tactical use.
Mm-hmm.
It can inform long-term strategic planning, potentially influencing future government policies, military strategies, and economic decisions.
Right.
And the fact that these activities are almost certainly backed by a nation-state
Mm-hmm.
underscores the long-term value they place on this type of intelligence gathering.
Yeah, it's not just, some random group of hackers. This is a coordinated effort with a lot of resources behind it.
Absolutely.
Um, and what about the impact on the private sector beyond just, defense and high tech?
So corporate espionage is also a significant aspect of APT3's activities.
Okay.
They have shown a persistent ability to infiltrate and access private sector networks to gather valuable business intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And this intelligence can then be leveraged for economic gain or to undermine competitors,
Right.
further highlighting the broad economic impact of their operations.
So it's really a wide-ranging threat that affects just about every industry.
It does, yeah.
So to bring it all together, APT3 really stands out as a prime example of how state-sponsored cyber espionage operates in the modern era, constantly adapting its targets and tactics to influence global geopolitics and economic competition.
Absolutely. Yeah, their evolution from Operation Clandestine Fox,
Mm.
primarily focused on U.S. defense and technology, to Operation Double Tap with its advanced multi-stage attacks,
Mm.
coupled with their significant pivot towards politically sensitive targets in Hong Kong,
Right.
truly showcases their adaptability, strategic thinking, and the persistent nature of these state-sponsored cyber threats.
So let's recap some of the key takeaways for you, our listeners,
Yeah.
just to kind of drive home some of the most important points here.
So, firstly, APT3 has clearly demonstrated an evolution in its targeting priorities,
Mm-hmm.
moving from a strong initial focus on economic espionage against the United States to a more pronounced emphasis on political intelligence gathering, particularly concerning Hong Kong.
Okay.
Secondly, their tactics, techniques, and procedures are both highly sophisticated and carefully tailored to their targets,
Right.
allowing them to effectively evade detection and maintain long-term access to compromised systems.
Uh-huh.
And finally, the consequences of their activities are far-reaching with significant economic and geopolitical ramifications for both private sector organizations and governments across the globe.
So really a truly global threat that we all need to be aware of.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think for any cybersecurity professionals listening, it's pretty clear that, a deep understanding of the methods and objectives of advanced persistent threat groups like APT3 is absolutely essential in navigating today's complex threat landscape.
It is indeed. The strategically driven nature of these attacks underscores the critical importance of not only implementing robust technical defenses,
Mm-hmm.
but also cultivating a keen awareness of the broader geopolitical context
Right.
in which these cyber operations unfold.
Yeah, it's not just about the technology, it's about understanding the motivations and the bigger picture.
Precisely.
Okay, so just a final thought to leave you with. Considering the ever-increasing sophistication and adaptability of groups like APT3,
Hmm.
what are the long-term consequences of persistent intellectual property theft on the pace of global innovation and the shifting balance of power in international relations?
It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a complex question and one that deserves, ongoing consideration and discussion.
Absolutely.
But thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been really insightful. My pleasure. And we'll see you next time.
See you then.